At sunrise, 321 armed warriors stood silent, their shadows stretching across the ground as the cold morning wind whispered secrets no one dared to speak. This was not the silence of peace and not the tension of war, but something far more dangerous. In the center of the village, an outsider lay awake, his heart pounding as he slowly realized where he was and what the dawn truly meant. Just hours ago, he was a stranger passing through unfamiliar land, unaware that one moment would change his fate forever. Now, every breath felt heavy. Every sound outside the tent felt closer, sharper, final. The warriors did not shout, and their weapons did not rise. Yet their presence carried a message stronger than violence. A single mistake had tied his destiny to a powerful tribe, an unbreakable tradition, and a woman whose life was bound to honor above all else. As the sun climbed higher, one truth became clear. This morning would decide whether he would walk away as a husband or fall as a sacrifice. He was an outsider who never planned to stay the night, only a traveler moving through land that did not belong to him, following a road that promised nothing more than shelter and rest. He did not know the rules of the tribe, and he did not understand how deeply they protected their honor. Darkness had fallen quickly, and exhaustion forced him to stop where he should not have stayed. Inside the village, every fire, every shadow, and every silent face carried history older than his own name. What felt like a small decision became a turning point written by fate itself. While he slept, the tribe watched, and destiny quietly closed every path behind him. By morning, he would no longer be just a stranger passing through. He would stand at the center of a tradition that allowed no escape, no excuses, and no mercy. Fate had chosen him without warning, and once chosen, there was no turning back. His eyes opened slowly, heavy with sleep, but his body froze the moment unfamiliar smells and shadows surrounded him, and fear rushed through his chest like fire. Rough fabric brushed his skin as he realized he was lying inside a tribal tent, its walls painted with symbols he had never seen before, and before he could sit up, he sensed another presence beside him. He turned his head, breath shaking, and there she was, asleep only inches away, the chief's daughter, her face calm yet powerful, her dark hair spread across the mat like a warning he did not yet understand. Confusion twisted into panic as memories of the night returned in broken pieces. The fire, the food, the quiet kindness that had felt safe but was never meant to cross a line. His heart pounded harder when he understood what this meant in a land ruled by tradition, where actions spoke louder than intentions and excuses had no value. Outside the tent, the morning air felt tense, filled with distant movement, low voices, and the dull sound of metal shifting, as if the village itself was waking with judgment in its eyes. He tried to move away slowly, afraid even the smallest sound would seal his fate, but before he could, her eyes opened. She looked at him, not with shock, not with anger, but with a deep sadness that told him she already knew how this would end. In her silence, he felt the weight of generations, rules carved into blood and honor, laws that did not bend for strangers or accidents. She sat up carefully, pulling her blanket closer, and for a brief moment their eyes met, sharing a truth neither of them had chosen. He wanted to speak, to explain, to promise that nothing had happened, but the words died before reaching his lips because he realized truth was no longer enough. A sharp drumbeat echoed outside, slow and deliberate, followed by footsteps circling the tent, steady and controlled, not rushed, not violent, but final. Sweat formed on his forehead as the reality closed in, and he understood that the night had bound them together in the eyes of the tribe whether he accepted it or not. She lowered her gaze, her shoulders stiff with quiet strength, carrying a burden she had been raised to accept without complaint. He saw fear in her hands, though her face remained composed, and that fear cut deeper than any weapon waiting outside. As the light of dawn filtered through the tent, painting everything in gold and shadow, he knew this awakening was not just the start of a morning, but the beginning of a trial that would decide his life, her future, and the honor of an entire tribe, and there was no path left behind him, only the one waiting beyond the tent walls. His heart began to race faster as understanding settled deep inside him, sharp and unforgiving, because the laws of this tribe were no longer rumors, but living truth closing around his chest. Every story he had ever heard about sacred customs returned at once, heavy with consequences that could not be argued away. He knew that even silence could be judged as guilt here, and one wrong breath could decide his fate. The air inside the tent felt thinner, pressing against his lungs, while outside the steady movements of people preparing for something serious grew clearer with every second. Fear tightened his muscles, urging him to flee, yet his body refused to move, trapped between instinct and respect. His mind searched for logic, for some forgotten rule that might protect him, but tradition allowed no space for chance or misunderstanding. He glanced at her again, noticing the strength in her stillness, and realized she had carried this knowledge since childhood, trained to accept judgment without resistance. That realization filled him with shame, because panic was a luxury she had never been given. Voices outside became firmer, not angry, but official, as if the village itself had reached a decision long before he woke. He imagined the warriors standing in formation, faces unreadable, weapons held with discipline rather than rage, which made the danger feel even more real. Death here would not come from chaos, but from calm agreement. His pulse echoed in his ears as memories of the night twisted into fear, every harmless moment now threatening to become proof against him. He wanted to swear that no boundary had been crossed, yet he understood that truth was measured differently in this world, where presence alone carried meaning. His thoughts spiraled toward the image of punishment, not brutal, not cruel, but final, and that thought hollowed his stomach. Still, beneath the terror, another feeling surfaced, quieter but stronger, the weight of responsibility settling into his spine. Running would not erase what had already been decided. An escape would stain his name forever, even if he survived. He straightened his back slowly, forcing his breathing to steady, knowing fear could be seen as weakness in a place built on honor. She rose beside him with controlled grace, her expression calm, yet her eyes reflected the same understanding, and in that silent exchange he felt the bond of shared fate tighten. The tent entrance shifted as light grew brighter, and footsteps stopped just outside, waiting without urgency, certain of their authority. His hands trembled briefly before he clenched them into fists, grounding himself in the moment, because panic would only shorten what little choice remained. He realized that this trial was not only about survival, but about how a man faced judgment when excuses held no power. As the morning sounds sharpened and the moment approached, he accepted one undeniable truth with painful clarity, that a single mistake had already changed everything, and whatever happened next would define him forever. She opened her eyes slowly as the light crept into the tent, her breathing steady even though her heart carried a quiet storm, because she understood the meaning of dawn long before it arrived. She did not gasp or move in fear, since fear had been taught out of her through years of tradition and duty, yet worry rested deep within her chest where no one else could see it. She felt the weight of the village already awake, already watching, already judging, and she knew that her life was no longer her own in this moment. Raised as the chief's daughter, she had learned that honor was heavier than emotion and silence was stronger than tears. Her calm was not peace, but control, shaped by the knowledge that the sun never rose without consequence. She sensed his tension beside her, sharp and restless, and though she did not turn to look at him, she felt his fear like heat in the air. She wanted to speak, not to defend herself, not to accuse him, but to soften the truth she knew was waiting outside, yet words would only weaken what must be faced with strength. In her world, dawn decided futures, and this dawn carried a judgment older than memory. She remembered the lessons given to her as a child, that choice was a privilege not always granted, and duty was the path carved by ancestors. The morning sounds grew clearer, the shifting feet, the low voices, the deliberate pauses, all signs that the elders and warriors had gathered with purpose. She lowered her gaze, steadying herself, because panic would shame her bloodline, and she refused to let that happen. Though her face remained composed, her thoughts moved quickly, not toward escape, but toward acceptance, because resistance would only deepen the wound already formed. She felt sorrow, not for herself alone, but for the stranger whose life had crossed hers in a way neither had planned. She understood that he did not belong here, yet belonging was not decided by intention, only by circumstance. Her fingers tightened briefly against the fabric beneath her, grounding her body as her spirit prepared for what must come next. She stood with quiet grace, her posture straight, carrying the strength expected of her, even as uncertainty pressed against her ribs. In her eyes lived the knowledge that she would be asked to stand before her people, not as a daughter seeking protection, but as a symbol of law itself. She did not know whether the outcome would bring union or loss, but she knew it would be final. As the tint brightened and the moment drew closer, she accepted the truth she had always been taught, that fear could be felt but never shown, and that dawn did not wait for readiness. This was the hour she had been prepared for her entire life, and she would meet it without a sound. The rule that governed this moment was older than the tints, older than the paths carved into the land, and it moved forward now with quiet certainty, leaving no room for argument or delay. In this tribe, sharing a night was not judged by intention or explanation, because closeness itself carried meaning that could not be undone. The law was simple and severe, shaped to protect honor above comfort, and everyone present understood its weight without needing it spoken aloud. Marriage offered restoration and balance, while refusal led only to loss, not as punishment driven by anger, but as preservation of order that held the tribe together. As the sun climbed higher, the truth pressed down on both of them, tightening like a cord pulled slowly but firmly. He felt the rules settle into his thoughts, heavy and unavoidable, as he realized that choice had narrowed to two paths, each demanding courage of a different kind. She stood quietly, knowing this law had guided the lives of countless women before her, shaping unions and endings with equal certainty, and she carried that history in her posture. The tribe believed that allowing exceptions would weaken everything they stood for, so mercy was found only in obedience. Outside, the gathering grew more organized, movements precise, voices measured, because this was not chaos but ceremony preparing to unfold. He sensed that his future would be decided not by debate, but by how he met what was required of him. Fear returned in sharp waves, yet beneath it rose a sense of gravity that demanded respect, because running now would turn him into a symbol of dishonor remembered long after he was gone. She understood that her role was not to plead, since pleading would suggest shame, and shame had no place in this tradition. Her calm became a shield, protecting not just herself but the law she had been raised to represent. The air between them felt charged with unspoken understanding, a shared awareness that the night had bound their lives together in the eyes of everyone waiting beyond the tent. He thought of the world he came from, where mistakes could be explained and paths could be changed, and he felt the distance between that life and this moment stretch wider than ever. Here, explanation held no value, only acceptance or rejection. The rule did not ask whether love existed, because love was something that could grow after duty was fulfilled. The choice ahead demanded more than survival. It demanded alignment with a way of life that judged character through action. As the sounds outside settled into expectant silence, the law moved closer, no longer an idea but a presence shaping the next breath he would take. She lifted her chin slightly, ready to face what had been decided long before either of them was born. And in that instant he understood that this tradition was unbreakable not because it was cruel, but because it was believed to be necessary. Marriage or death stood before them, not as threats, but as the only truths the dawn would allow. The first drumbeat rolled through the air like a warning carried by the wind, deep and steady, sending a clear signal that the moment had arrived. Each beat followed another with purpose, not rushed, not violent, but firm enough to be felt in the chest, and with every echo the space outside the tent grew heavier. Footsteps began to gather, measured and controlled, the sound of many men moving as one, their presence forming a circle of authority around what could no longer be delayed. He felt the vibration beneath his feet and understood that this was no ordinary gathering, but a calling of witnesses bound by duty rather than emotion. The warriors did not shout or argue as they took their positions, because silence carried more power than noise, and discipline spoke louder than threat. She remained still beside him, her expression unchanged, yet her senses were sharp, trained to read every sound, every pause. every breath outside. The rhythm of the drums marked the passage of choice, each beat pulling the future closer with undeniable force. He imagined the faces beyond the fabric walls, hardened by loyalty, shaped by tradition, men who would not raise their weapons unless the law demanded it. The knowledge tightened his throat, because their restraint made the danger unmistakably real. The air felt charged with anticipation as the steps stopped, one by one, until only the drums remained, slower now, deliberate, commanding attention from everyone present. She drew a quiet breath, grounding herself, because she knew that this sound had guided ceremonies of union and judgment for generations, and it never played without purpose. He sensed her resolve beside him and felt a strange pull toward it, as if her calm offered the only steady ground left beneath his shaking thoughts. The tent seemed smaller with each passing second, its walls holding back a crowd that waited not for chaos, but for confirmation. Outside, the warriors stood aligned, their gathering complete, their patience unbroken, prepared to accept whatever outcome the law revealed. He realized that no one there sought blood, yet none would hesitate if honor required it, and that balance terrified him more than rage ever could. The drums slowed again, signaling readiness, and the silence between beats stretched long enough to force every truth to the surface. She straightened her shoulders, carrying the weight of her lineage with quiet dignity, knowing she would soon step forward not as an individual, but as part of something far greater. He swallowed hard, his pulse steadying despite the fear, because this was no longer a moment for panic, but for presence. The warriors outside were no longer just figures of authority. They were witnesses to a decision that would echo beyond this morning. As the final drumbeat faded into stillness, the footsteps settled into complete silence, and in that quiet he understood that the gathering was finished, the judgment ready, and the next step would change everything for both of them. His body leaned toward escape even as his mind forced him to remain still, because every instinct born from survival urged him to break free and disappear before the moment claimed him completely. Fear whispered that speed could save him, that one sudden move might tear a path through uncertainty, yet something stronger rooted his feet to the ground. Honor, unfamiliar yet undeniable, pressed against his conscience, demanding he face what had formed rather than flee from it. He felt torn between two worlds, one where survival meant avoiding consequences, and another where dignity required standing firm despite the cost. His thoughts raced through imagined outcomes, each more uncertain than the last, and none offered safety without sacrifice. The desire to live clashed violently with the need to be worthy of life, and that conflict burned deeper than fear alone ever could. He looked toward the tent opening, aware that beyond it waited judgment shaped not by anger, but by expectation, and that realization stripped escape of its promise. Responsibility settled into him slowly, heavy but grounding, as he understood that running would not erase what had already been acknowledged by the tribe. It would only turn him into a symbol of weakness, remembered not for courage but for refusal. His breathing steadied as he recognized that fear sought comfort, while responsibility demanded resolve. She stood close enough for him to sense her presence, not asking for reassurance, not offering guidance, yet her quiet strength sharpened his awareness of the moment. He felt ashamed of his urge to flee when she had never been given the option, and that awareness reshaped his struggle. His heart continued to pound, but his thoughts grew clearer, cutting through panic with purpose. He accepted that choice still existed, though narrow, and that how he faced it mattered more than the outcome itself. The pull to run weakened as he imagined the faces of those waiting, warriors who valued courage above survival, and elders who measured character through action. He realized that honor here was not about pride, but about balance, about meeting consequence with integrity rather than resistance. Fear did not vanish, but it lost control as responsibility rose to claim its place. His shoulders squared as he committed to standing through whatever followed, knowing that escape would only trade one danger for a deeper disgrace. The silence around him grew heavier, as if the world paused to observe his decision, and he felt exposed yet strangely grounded. He no longer searched for excuses or chances, because acceptance brought clarity that panic never could. The conflict within him did not resolve into peace, but into direction, and that direction held him steady. As he prepared to step forward, He understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to remain when fear offered an easier path. In that realization, his struggle reached its peak, and though uncertainty still loomed, he stood ready to face it, guided by the quiet understanding that honor, once chosen, could not be abandoned without losing himself entirely. The presence outside shifted the moment the chief approached, not announced by noise, but by a sudden stillness that pressed against the tent like a held breath. He entered with calm authority, his posture straight, his movements deliberate, carrying the weight of leadership without display. His face revealed nothing, shaped by years of judgment where emotion could cloud justice, and his eyes moved slowly across the space, observing every detail before settling on the two figures before him. He did not speak at first, because silence often revealed more truth than questions ever could. The air tightened as his gaze rested on the man, steady and piercing, searching past fear and posture to find what lay beneath. Excuses held no value here, and the chief had no interest in hearing words shaped by panic or self-preservation. He measured honesty through presence, through the way a person stood when escape was still possible. The man felt that gaze settle on him like weight, not threatening, but demanding, and he resisted the urge to look away, knowing avoidance would speak louder than any lie. The chief then turned his attention to his daughter, his expression unchanged, though something deeper passed through his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of her strength. She met his look without hesitation, her calm unbroken, reflecting the discipline he had taught her since childhood. In that moment, he saw not just his child, but the living symbol of the law he was sworn to uphold. The chief stepped closer, his presence filling the space, and with that step came the unspoken reminder that personal feeling must never stand above tradition. He did not raise his voice or question the past night, because the truth of it already existed in the gathering outside. His concern was not what had happened, but how it would be faced. The man sensed that this was the moment where his choices would be weighed, not against rules written on stone, but against the values that shaped the tribe's survival. The chief's eyes returned to him, steady and sharp, waiting not for defense, but for resolve. He seemed to look through fear itself, searching for responsibility, for respect, for the willingness to stand by consequence rather than flee from it. The silence stretched, heavy yet controlled, giving space for character to reveal itself. Outside, no warrior moved, because this exchange mattered more than any display of force. The chief finally spoke, his voice low and firm, carrying neither anger nor mercy, only certainty, and that tone made the moment irreversible. He did not accuse or threaten, because judgment was not his role alone, but his presence made clear that the path ahead would follow the law without exception. The man felt the final chance to retreat pass him by, replaced by the understanding that this moment demanded truth shown through action. As the chief stood there, powerful and unreadable, the weight of the tribe's future seemed to rest in his gaze, and both lives before him were bound to whatever he saw reflected back. The silence stretched like a living thing, pressing into every corner of the tent and spilling outward where the tribe waited, their forms still and disciplined, yet their presence heavier than any words could convey. Each breath felt measured, each heartbeat louder than the next, as if the world itself paused to witness what would unfold. The man felt the weight of judgment settle on his shoulders, sharper than any weapon, because here there was no debate, no chance to explain, only the demand to stand and accept the consequences of a night that had already been observed. He glanced at her, the chief's daughter, whose calm seemed unshakable yet spoke of awareness deeper than fear, as though she carried the knowledge of what generations before had endured under the same gaze. Outside, the warrior's eyes were fixed, unblinking, silent witnesses to the moment when tradition collided with circumstance, and their stillness made the air itself tremble with expectation. The drums had faded, leaving only the weight of anticipation, a pressure that pressed him to confront himself, to reveal courage without hesitation, and to acknowledge the responsibility that could not be ignored. His thoughts raced, but the movement of panic had slowed, replaced by a raw understanding that his next actions would define his place within this tribe, either as a man worthy of respect or as an outsider forever marked by hesitation. She shifted slightly, imperceptibly, yet he noticed, sensing the subtle strength that steadied both of them, her presence a silent anchor in a storm that had no mercy for weakness. The chief's eyes remained fixed, unreadable and commanding, as if he measured the truth flowing in their veins, waiting for evidence of integrity rather than explanations. Every second stretched into eternity as the sun climbed higher, lighting the tent in stark gold and shadow, revealing the space between compliance and defiance, between fear and honor. He could feel the weight of generations pressing through the tent's thin fabric, reminding him that tradition demanded clarity, that silence in the face of law could be louder than any protest. The air vibrated with expectation, heavy, deliberate, a living pause that left no room for error, no time for doubt. Only the unspoken demand that he rise to the occasion before the gaze of every witness. She exhaled slowly, a soft sound almost lost in the hush, yet it carried with it centuries of understanding and the reminder that courage was not absence of fear, but action in spite of it. His palms sweated, knees weak, yet his spine stiffened as he realized that this moment required everything he could offer, nothing less. The tension grew, thickening like fog, pressing against his chest, yet clarity emerged through the pressure, teaching him that respect here was earned in silence, proven through the smallest motion, and reflected in the way he faced what must come next. And in that heavy stillness, where every eye, every heartbeat, every shadow waited, he understood fully that the dawn was no longer simply light, but verdict, and the way he moved, the way he breathed, the way he held himself, would speak louder than any words could convey, for the tribe would remember this moment forever, and their judgment would shape everything yet to come. He drew in a deep breath, feeling the weight of every gaze upon him, the silent judgment of the tribe pressing like stone against his chest. Yet with that pressure came clarity, and he stood taller, forcing his shoulders back, letting his posture speak where words had no power, because he had reached the point where fear could no longer dictate action and respect demanded that he accept what had been placed upon him. He did not make this choice lightly, nor was it driven by instinct alone, for he understood fully the gravity of the tradition he was submitting to, a law older than memory, older than the hills that framed the village, and in that knowledge his heart beat with both terror and resolve. She watched him with an unreadable expression, her eyes steady, her hands loose but ready, sensing the shift in him as courage settled into his spine and fear receded into the background where it belonged. The warriors outside waited in patient silence, their faces unyielding, their presence a reminder that every motion, every breath, every step would be seen and measured against generations of expectation. He felt the full weight of responsibility land on him, heavier than any weapon, sharper than any threat, because this was not about choice in the usual sense, but about alignment with a way of life that had endured by demanding honor above self-interest. His mind replayed every warning, every story he had heard of outsiders who failed, of men who faltered under pressure and paid for hesitation, and he realized that standing firm was more than survival. It was acknowledgement of the life he now touched, the people he now respected, and the woman beside him who had silently borne the same law all her life. The sunlight filtered through the tent walls, catching on his face, highlighting the determination in his eyes, the steadying of his breath, the set of his jaw, all evidence that he understood the moment's significance. He no longer considered running, because to flee would dishonor not only himself but the woman who had not chosen this either, and he could not betray her trust, however unspoken. Every muscle in his body tensed then relaxed as decision replaced panic, a quiet transformation from terror to resolve that she recognized immediately, a silent acknowledgement passing between them that neither words nor ceremony could fully contain. The chief's presence loomed still, unreadable and powerful, and he nodded once, subtly, not in approval, but in recognition that the law had been met with the courage it demanded. Outside, the warriors remained statuesque, yet the air shifted imperceptibly, tension loosening slightly as the tribe saw that the outsider had chosen honor over fear. He felt the enormity of the day ahead, knowing that consequences would follow, duties would weigh, and eyes would remain upon him. Yet he also felt a strange clarity, a grounding that fear had never provided. By standing, fully present, fully aware, fully respectful, he had claimed not just survival, but a fragile place within the fabric of the tribe, And in that act, silent yet definitive, he had begun the path to proving himself worthy of both tradition and trust. And as the dawn broke fully across the village, his decision resonated through the space around him, unspoken but unmistakable. And the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next step to seal what honor had demanded. Her eyes blurred as the weight she had carried for years finally found a thread of release, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, not born of sorrow but of relief, because in his decision she recognized something rare and unspoken, a courage that met the law with respect rather than rebellion, a strength that honored her family and their traditions without hesitation or excuse. She had watched him struggle, had felt his fear radiate in every tense movement, and yet now she saw the resolve settle into his posture, the quiet acceptance of responsibility. And in that, she found hope where panic had lived, relief mixed with admiration, because courage here was measured not in bold gestures or words, but in the stillness of choice, in the alignment of presence with consequence. And he had met it fully, without flinching. Her heart eased slightly, the tension that had wrapped around her chest for hours loosening as she realized that he would not falter under the gaze of the tribe, that he would face the day with the integrity she had always been taught to respect. She looked at him as if seeing him anew, not as an outsider who stumbled into their lives, but as a man who understood the stakes, who recognized that honor was heavier than fear, and that respect was the true measure of strength. Every movement he made now carried meaning, the slightest shift, the way he held his head, the steadying of his hands, all spoke louder than any words could convey. She felt a quiet pride swelling inside her, mingled with the lingering anxiety of what was to come, because the path ahead remained steep and uncertain, but for the first time she sensed that it could be navigated without shame or conflict. Outside, the warriors remained statuesque, their presence a constant reminder of the traditions that guided them. Yet their eyes softened imperceptibly as they noted his composure, seeing not only compliance, but an understanding that bridged the gap between stranger and tribe. She exhaled slowly, letting a breath she had held for hours escape, and in that simple act, she acknowledged the unspoken bond forming between them, a connection built on mutual recognition of courage and duty. The chief remained still, powerful and unreadable, yet even his gaze seemed to register the subtle shift, a quiet nod in acknowledgement that the outsider had met expectation with honesty and bravery. She straightened, brushing the momentary tears away, feeling a strange warmth that mixed relief, respect, and a sense of shared destiny, as if the night's trials had already begun to shape something enduring. Every heartbeat echoed in the silence that followed, heavy with meaning, as she realized that this man, once unknown and untested, had claimed a place beside her not through luck or accident, but through the deliberate act of standing firm, accepting consequence, and demonstrating courage where it mattered most. In that recognition, she felt the fragile beginnings of trust and the quiet promise that whatever dawn brought next, they would face it together, bound by the respect forged in the unspoken language of fear, honor, and unwavering bravery. The chief's unexpected movement sent a ripple through the tent, a subtle but undeniable shift in authority, because instead of the anger the man had braced for, a slow, deliberate nod passed from the chief, acknowledging not only compliance but courage, and in that single motion, the weight of judgment seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a measured respect that carried more power than words ever could. The man felt a tense release flood through him, muscles uncoiling from hours of rigid anticipation, though the tension lingered, tempered by the understanding that honor here was not a gift, but a recognition earned through action and presence. The daughter's eyes widened slightly, reflecting the same mixture of relief and awe, tears that had threatened to spill now damp with hope rather than fear, because in that nod she saw the quiet validation of everything they had silently endured. The warriors outside shifted imperceptibly, standing taller, yet their discipline remained intact, as if the chief's acknowledgement alone had reaffirmed the law, ensuring that the tribe's values remained unbroken while rewarding the courage that had met expectation. Every breath in the tent felt heavier with significance, as if time itself had slowed to mark the moment when tradition met choice, and the two lives before him were now bound not by fear or obligation alone, but by a mutual recognition of respect and understanding that transcended words. The man felt his chest rise and fall with steadier rhythm, the adrenaline of panic replaced by a focused awareness, because he realized that this nod was more than approval. It was a bridge, a passage into the tribe's heart, earned through the quiet bravery of standing firm when fear had offered escape. The daughter's hand brushed slightly against the mat, a subtle gesture of relief, and he noticed it, feeling a warmth of connection that had not existed before, a silent acknowledgement that the trial of judgment had passed, and that trust, fragile yet powerful, had begun to form between them. Outside, the stillness of the warriors seemed to shift toward observation rather than threat, the tension in the air dissolving into measured calm, reinforcing that what had been tested was not defiance but integrity, and the chief's nod confirmed that the standards of the tribe had been met without compromise. The man's mind replayed every second of his inner conflict, every heartbeat of hesitation, and he realized that courage had not been the absence of fear, but the willingness to stand in its presence, to meet consequence with respect rather than complaint, and in that understanding, the significance of the moment deepened, carrying not only relief but a quiet pride. The daughter's gaze softened, her composure steady yet imbued with gratitude, because the unspoken acknowledgement between them promised cooperation and harmony, a fragile yet undeniable connection forged in the crucible of tradition. The chief remained a pillar of authority, powerful and unreadable, yet the nod had transformed the atmosphere, turning expectation into acceptance and tension into recognition. Every shadow in the tent seemed lighter, every breath more deliberate, because the act of meeting law with courage had reshaped the space, proving that honor was not demanded through fear alone, but recognized when met with integrity. And as the sun climbed fully over the village, casting golden light through the tent, the man, the daughter, and the watching tribe understood simultaneously that a moment that could have ended in judgment had instead become a testament to bravery, respect, and the enduring strength of unbreakable tradition, setting the stage for the life and bonds that would follow. A sudden ripple of motion moved through the gathered crowd as the 321 warriors, who had stood in perfect silence and stillness since dawn, slowly lowered their weapons, each man shifting from tense readiness to quiet observation. And in that gesture, the man realized the full weight of what had been witnessed, that they had not come to punish or threaten, but to bear witness to an act of courage, to see honor demonstrated before the eyes of the tribe, and in that understanding a deep relief washed over him, grounding his fear with the recognition that the law had been met through presence and respect rather than chaos or defiance. The daughter's chest rose and fell with a steadier rhythm, her eyes meeting his for the briefest moment, conveying a silent acknowledgement of the shared ordeal, the unspoken trust that had grown between them in the hours of tension and expectation. The sunlight spilled fully into the village now, painting the warriors in gold and shadow, revealing their disciplined stances, each face calm yet watchful, a living testament to the traditions that governed their lives and ensured that every action, every motion, every decision was observed, measured, and respected. He felt the shift in energy around him, the collective weight of hundreds of witnesses now tempered with understanding, and though he remained tense, he knew that their lowering of weapons was a signal not just of approval but of acceptance, a subtle but profound affirmation that he had acted rightly, not by chance, but through the deliberate choice to meet consequence with courage. She straightened slightly, brushing away the last trace of tension from her shoulders, her gaze softening as she saw the expressions of the warriors change from anticipation to recognition, each lowering of a spear or axe marking a transition from judgment to acknowledgement. And in that, she sensed the beginning of peace between what had been feared and what was now accepted. The man's mind traced every moment that had brought him to this place, recalling fear, hesitation, inner conflict, and finally decision. And he realized that the tribe's observation had transformed what could have been a moment of peril into one of understanding, that the silent scrutiny had tested his resolve and found it worthy, and now their presence reinforced his new place within this community. The chief remained composed, powerful as ever, yet even he seemed to soften imperceptibly at the sight of the warrior's disciplined response, and the man understood that the nod he had received earlier had set the tone for what was to follow, allowing the tribe to shift from anticipation of punishment to acknowledgement of bravery. Outside the tent, the village itself seemed to breathe differently, the tension that had hung since dawn lifting gradually, replaced by a quiet, respectful calm that affirmed not only tradition but the integrity of those who honored it. Every heartbeat echoed with relief. Every breath carried the weight of recognition, and the unspoken bond between the man and the daughter strengthened in the face of communal witness, a shared understanding that had been forged in silence and trial. He realized fully that the warriors' act of lowering their weapons was more than ceremony. It was a testament to the way courage and respect could transform fear into trust, hesitation into acceptance, and strangers into part of a living, enduring tradition. And as the sun rose higher, illuminating the faces of all who had watched, he felt the first real sense of belonging, tempered with awe at the depth of the honor he had been asked to uphold and had now proven himself worthy to embrace. At dawn, the village breathed in unison, the first light spilling across the tents as an outsider, once trembling with fear and uncertainty, now stood embraced by the tribe as one of their own, his presence no longer questioned but honored. Every heartbeat from the night of tension echoed in memory, yet the fear that had once chained him dissolved into respect earned through courage, a silent proof that honor could transform even the most fragile moments into something enduring. The chief's nod, the daughter's quiet relief, the warriors' lowered weapons, all wove together into a tapestry of trust, binding strangers and tradition into a single, unbreakable truth. What began as a night shadowed by dread now ended with connection, a bond forged in courage, witnessed by many, yet deeply personal, echoing in the hearts of those who saw it. In that dawn, fear became respect, hesitation became loyalty, and a fleeting moment turned into a lifetime of honor remembered forever.